We are honored to have Donnel Baird, the visionary founder and CEO of BlocPower, join us today. Donnel's groundbreaking work has led to transformative sustainability initiatives across the United States. Under his leadership, BlocPower has partnered with the city of Ithaca to retrofit its entire building stock by 2030, making its first electrification initiative of its kind in the United States. Additionally, his efforts in securing a $150 million fundraising round in 2023 have propelled BlocPower's mission to democratize green engineering solutions, leveraging AI and initiative technologies. Donnel's inspiring journey from community organizer to tech entrepreneur, deeply rooted in his personal experiences, exemplifies his unwavering commitment to combating climate change and promoting wealth equality. In today's keynote, Donnel will explore how AI is revolutionizing building decarbonization. His talk will highlight how cities such as Ithaca, New York, leverage AI to prioritize projects by analyzing building characteristics, consumption patterns, costs, and socioeconomic factors to meet local community targets. With no further ado, I give you Donnel Baird.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for that wonderful introduction. Always fun to be here at MIT. So I'm Donnel. I run a company called BlocPower. We've been around for 10 years. We're a climate tech startup. Today we'll be talking a little bit about AI and the role that we think AI can and should play in city-scale decarbonization. And we think city-scale decarbonization is important because the truth of the matter is we only have a few short years left until 2030. And so when you work backwards in terms of the timeline of the climate crisis and where we need to be as a human species in order to really make progress on the climate crisis, there just isn't a path to really navigating the climate crisis without figuring out how to retrofit over 125 million American buildings. If we can't figure out how to do it in America, it's unclear whether Europe or other places around the world will be able to figure it out. Lots of folks are looking to us to innovate in this arena. And while the electric vehicle industry has been more attractive and sexy, not to use the word sexy with anything that pertains to Elon Musk, while it's been more interesting and intriguing, that's the right word, the buildings, as we all know, we're all here today, are really where we're going to see a massive amount of emissions, 30% of emissions here in the United States, as high as 40% globally. And so what does it mean to work backwards from a 2030 and where we need to be in 2030 to today to think about what the pace of decarbonization should be at city scale for whole transportation sector and for buildings. And so bluntly, our view is that we need to decarbonize at least 3 or 4 American cities by the year 2030. They need to be successful, like we actually need to go building to building and rip out all the fossil fuel equipment and appliances and replace it with all electric equipment and appliances, heat pumps or geothermal where we can, and take those buildings as close to net zero as possible. And then open source and share all of the learnings, all of the mechanical and electrical engineering studies, all of the financial feasibility analysis and underwriting, all of the construction, scopes of work and reports. All of that data should be shared by the successful American cities that decarbonize first so that they can inspire other cities around the world to follow suit. Because the truth of the matter is that when it comes to decarbonization at scale, most folks don't actually believe that it's truly possible. right? People don't think that we have the hardware, the software, the finance, the will that we need in order to actually decarbonize a whole American cities. It's never been done before, and people just don't believe that it's possible. So what we need to do is kind of break through that mental barrier and decarbonize a few cities. And after we do it, it'll be done, and then we'll share that learning with the rest of the world. So that's what BlocPower's ultimate goal is. Let's see if I can figure out how to. I'm going to talk about AI. Let's see if I can figure out how to work this clicker. Cool. So this is Alvin. Alvin lives in Brooklyn. He is a drug dealer. He was wandering around the streets a few months back, and he saw a flyer for a training program that we run, a workforce development program that we run in New York City. Mayor Eric Adams, who's a former police officer, wanted to reduce crime coming out of the pandemic in New York. He made a large investment in the NYPD, but he also set aside $400 or $500 million to train and hire local low-income people who were vulnerable to being involved in incidents of crime, like Alvin. And the mayor bet that if we could train and hire Alvin in new careers and gave him some real career opportunities and put some money in his pocket immediately, that we can take him off the street, convince him to leave the drug game behind, and put him on a new path. And so we told the mayor, look, we'd be interested in taking this bet with you, but we're a climate company, so we're only going to train people on how to do green construction. We're not going to teach Alvin how to paint restrooms or rake leaves or anything like that. We're going to teach him how to deal with installing and maintaining solar panels, EV charging stations, installing all electric heating and air conditioning systems and hot water systems, installing the internet, that we need to stream data from these smart devices in low-income communities, because too often these communities don't even have basic internet, as we learned during the pandemic. And so if you're willing to allow us to train folks like Alvin in a broad range of green construction skills and certifications, we will take on this challenge with you. And so so far we've trained about 4,000 low-income people who the NYPD has identified as being vulnerable to participating in crime. We can talk about the sociological definition of that and how ethical is it and all that. But Alvin was wandering the streets and saw a flyer for our training program and decided to come in. So after 6 months of training and being paid while he was being trained, he now produces solar panels, which are being exported to the Ukraine to help their army have local renewable energy to fight Vladimir Putin and Russian troops. And so he is now a successful participant and contributor in the green economy. We took several of Alvin's colleagues and friends and neighbors who we'd also trained. They happened to have relatives who were locked up in Rikers Island, the New York City jail, where we soon hope a former president may spend at least one day. We could put him one day in Rikers for Trump. I think that'd be great. Anyway, these guys have all spent some time in Rikers and have family members who have been locked up in Rikers, but through our training program, we sent them back to Rikers to install a ground-mounted solar system to provide power to Rikers, but also provide some power to Harlem and some of the communities nearby, provide some local clean energy. So this is Ithaca, which was mentioned in the fabulous introduction. Ithaca is where Cornell University is located. It was one of the first cities in America to pass a Green New Deal. Ithaca, like Cambridge, has a preponderance of college and university students. They had a really young mayor who's on his third term. I think he was like 34 years old, and he's on his third term. But they really wanted a Green New Deal, and they were one of the first cities in the country to pass it. So they did, and then they put out an RFP to find an engineering firm that was crazy enough to partner with them to figure out how to decarbonize all 6,000 buildings in the town of Ithaca. And so our company was crazy enough to sign that contract. This is a senior citizens center in Ithaca. That's one of the first projects that we've decarbonized there, or tried to decarbonize. I'm going to try to tie all this together. This, of course, is a fossil fuel boiler, which you can see in basements in Brooklyn or Harlem or Boston. old, dilapidated, super unhealthy. It's spewing carbon monoxide and benzene and methane into the home, even when it is off, driving cancer rates and really high chronic rates of childhood asthma. I think 13% of childhood asthma studies from MIT and Harvard Public Health and Stanford are showing that 13% of chronic childhood asthma in America is actually caused by gas appliances in our homes. It's going to be like lead paint, one of those things we thought it was fine, but it's totally poisonous and totally terrible. But how do we go building to building and remove this equipment? How do we train Alvin to deal with the lead, mold, and asbestos that he may navigate as he removes this piece of equipment and replaces it with all electric heat pumps and heat pump hot water heaters? That's kind of the skill set that we need Alvin and similar workers to have. Moreover, there's over $100 billion that President Biden and Vice President Harris have invested in figuring out how to green buildings. $20 billion was released by the EPA to create a national green bank. I don't know how many of you guys have been following that. The idea is folks like you could access low-cost, flexible, risk-tolerant, patient, long-term capital to finance your net zero projects in your buildings. There's $8.8 billion of grant money that you don't have to pay back. You're entitled to $30,000 per unit or per home to pay for net zero upgrades and electrification. But it's challenging to figure out how to access this money because, as you guys know, the kind of mechanical and electrical engineering feasibility analysis that has to occur on a building-by-building basis is super complex and super expensive and mostly wrong, right? The ASHRAE Level 1 and Level 2 and Level 3 reports that most of us pay engineering firms to do studies of how to take our buildings to net zero are expensive and often inaccurate. So if you break it down into the components, in each individual building, we've got to do a thermodynamic analysis of the building. How does it produce energy? How does it burn energy, heat it up? How does it distribute it through pipes, deliver it into individual units or rooms through ducts or radiators, or move through a building in a zone fashion? And what's the thermodynamic loss rate of heat and energy through the windows, through the walls, through the roof, right? Like fundamentally, those are the components of a building level engineering analysis, and that's what we're paying our white collar engineering firms to provide studies. And as you guys know, the studies can take 6 weeks or 6 months. They can cost tens of thousands of dollars, and they're mostly wrong. So let's tie this all together: workforce, thermodynamic analysis, city scale decarbonization. Yes. So what we've done is we, courtesy of Jeff Bezos, he gave us a $5 million grant to build digital twins of every building in America. We partnered with the EPA and the U.S. Department of Energy to aggregate data on all 125 million buildings in America. We got our investors at Microsoft to sell us some data. We got data on all the buildings from Zillow. We bought construction data, energy utility data, and mashed it all together into this giant data lake, and then spent several years building an AI model that runs the physics-based analysis for all 125 million buildings in America. And so instead of continuing to rely on engineers to manually perform the physics-based analysis and planning for how to decarbonize all of our buildings, we set about figuring out how to use AI to provide a free analysis of all the buildings in America that provides a feasibility score and an actionable scope of work that a contractor or homeowner can print out and figure out how to use that as a guide to help them figure out how to decarbonize their building. And the thinking is that by providing this as a free service to the country, that we can start to reduce some of the $5,000, $10,000, $100,000 soft costs that are part of the upfront feasibility analysis of figuring out how to take buildings to net zero. And if we could do that at scale, that would be the innovation that would allow us to take a whole city to scale. So now we can go back to Ithaca, and we have a free analysis of how to take each and every individual building out of all 6,000 buildings in Ithaca. We have a feasibility score and a plan for how to take each building down to net zero that can be handed off to the homeowner and to the contractor and to the government, to the utility company, to get everybody on the same page about how to go building to building and take each individual building to net zero. That creates an interesting opportunity when we circle back to workforce. Now, instead of having a really well-trained specialty white-collar engineer who's visiting the building and doing the physics-based analysis, we now can take like an ex-offender like Alvin, and with his smartphone, he can actually simulate and in many cases exceed the accuracy of building-by-building feasibility analysis with the support of AI. So an AI-enabled worker, a green-collar worker, who is using their smartphone, or maybe there's a FLIR camera, or maybe using LiDAR on the back of the iPhone to capture data on site, uploading that data to the cloud, having the AI re-simulate the physics of that building based on on-site information that we've collected via the smartphone, spitting out a feasibility analysis. That allows us to rapidly decomplexify and speed up the amount of work that's necessary to figure out how to decarbonize a building. And the same worker who's doing the analysis can actually come in and install the heat pumps or the solar panels or both. And that lowers costs. And so we've increased speed, we've lowered cost by using AI to help guide our new generation of workers on how to green buildings at scale. So we think that there's a flywheel, and we stole this from Bezos, who talks about the flywheel at Amazon in terms of his business model, but we think that AI-generated and AI-enabled digital twins of all the buildings in America really enable an interesting flywheel. We reduce the upfront cost of each individual project, so we're able to complete more projects as customers are willing to pay lower prices to decarbonize their buildings. So we increase the overall project volume of completed building electrification projects, which of course generates more data. And that increased volume of data improves our AI model as it retrains our AI system. And as our AI system gets smarter and smarter, it's able to further reduce costs and increase project volume. So that's the idea, as we get better and better at predicting and analyzing decarbonization plans for buildings. We should create a higher volume of completed projects, and all of that data should really enable us to gain some efficiencies and get to scale. That's how we think AI can really help us decarbonize an entire city. For those of you who are interested in data, our digital twins include mortgage data, property tax data, air pollution. We have local weather data, so we have all the weather pattern data. Humidity, temperature, pressure from inside the buildings through low-cost sensors. Energy consumption data from the utility companies. And of course, what climate zone the buildings are in. So using, this slide is probably like 6 or 7 months old, but we were able to use our AI model to help us complete the first 11 or 12 electrification projects in downtown Ithaca, focusing on community buildings. Like my favorite project up there is like this church where we're gonna have the pastor stand up and say, "Hey, we electrified this church," and everybody in the congregation can do the same with their building. So we're making progress so far. There are over 50 cities across the country that we are partnering with to use our AI model to help them guide their net zero planning at city scale. And interestingly enough, over the last 12 months, there's been 4 or 5 other American cities that we've signed contracts with who followed Ithaca's lead. They also want to be net zero by the year 2030. Not 2050 or 2040, that's very far out. 2040 is within the range of a mayor or a governor. You have to have specific plans of how do you intend to decarbonize this entire city by 2030. And so we're decarbonizing the transportation system across LA by Thanksgiving this year. The city of San Jose, which is actually the 10th biggest city in America, has passed a law that's going to be net zero by 2030, and so we have that contract. It's going to cost $1.5 billion or so in capital to invest in decarbonizing all of those buildings. And then Menlo Park, where Stanford is located, is also going to decarbonize. So here we are in Cambridge. We do want to encourage you guys here in Cambridge to take up the challenge. We don't want Stanford and Cornell and San Jose State to get all the glory. And so we hope to encourage all of you at MIT to really work with the city of Cambridge and Boston in order to encourage them to pick up the challenge and not be laggards. And we think it'd be good for MIT for you guys to continue to have your students engage with Cambridge and Boston to help those cities become net zero. Both cities do have net zero goals. They are further out. They are not as aggressive as Ithaca and Menlo Park and San Jose. Nothing you can do about that. But certainly MIT can really push your cities to compete and keep pace with these other cities to try to get to net zero. And we're certainly happy to lend our AI model to you all in support of that. I think we have a contract with the city of Boston and Cambridge to support some workforce development and net zero projects, building electrification projects in Cambridge as kind of pilot projects, and that's really exciting. But we would like to see you guys do more, and so that is the last part of my agenda. I think that's the end of my talk. So I will yield the balance of my time. I know we got a panel coming up, which I will join, and I look forward to taking questions from the audience and continuing the conversation. Thanks.